Hello and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero and I'll be your host this evening. If you're new to the channel, I'm a longtime pro who specializes in the low stakes. I have an educational channel where I deep delve into every notable hand that I play, whether I win or lose, and analyze it down to the fine details, so that you guys can get a better understanding of bet sizing, position, how to maximize your profits, how to minimize your losses, how to range your opponents, and essentially how to become overall better poker players. Tonight I have a super special episode for you guys. Not only will this episode feature over 100 hands worth of continuous play, where you get to see each and every single hand I get dealt in a single session, but I'm also doing a collab with Jesse from Minivan Poker. As usual for these sorts of videos, we're going to examine what cards I choose to play in which positions, which hands I think are worth calling for certain raise amounts, which hands I think are worth raising, and for how much. We're going to be playing 1-3 no limit hold'em at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, where I'll be buying in for 500, which is the max. It's Friday night, although technically Saturday morning on December the 20th, since we don't start until 1:20 in the morning. The very first hand of the night, under the gun, opens for 13. It folds around to Jesse in the hijack, who 3-bets to 40. With 10 jack offsuit in the cutoff, even though I have position, this is just a clean and clear fold. Jesse ends up winning over 200 bucks his very first hand dealt. The very next hand, the middle position, an older Asian man, opens for 30. Yes, he straight up opens for 10x. And no, this is not a standard raise here whatsoever. Jesse calls in the low jack with what he will later reveal to me as pocket jacks. He recognized the non-standard raise amount and made the right choice of only just smooth calling instead of 3-betting. Normally with pocket jacks, you'll want to 3-bet the vast majority of opening raises. However, when you're facing a 10x raise, you need to recognize that this is an extremely large raise amount. You need to be very cautious versus this sort of non-standard sizing. This is very often a really large hand. We're talking top of range like aces or kings. So obviously with queen 5 suited in the hijack, this is just another easy fold for me. The button ends up making the call as well. When the flop comes queen 6 deuce, rainbow, and the middle position c-bets with a very strong 2/3 pot size bet of 60, Jesse makes a smart fold, and the middle position ended up having pocket kings in this hand. Luckily for Jesse, the flop featured an overcard, so he was able to get away from this one really cheap, losing the absolute minimum. Here under the gun opens for 10. He's the same gentleman who opened for 30 in the last hand. I recognize the much smaller raise amount, so call with ace 10 offsuit in the low jack. The cutoff also calls, when the button suddenly 3-bets to 25. The small blind cold calls, and the under the gun original raiser calls as well. Okay, first off I want to mention that a 3-bet to 25 here is terrible. It's not big enough to isolate after a $10 open and 2 callers. You want to use a much larger sizing here to like 45 or 50. You gotta remember we're playing 1-3 after all, and in these super low stakes, people are willing to cold call even absurd raise amounts with very mediocre hands. Case in point, the small blind thought it was a good idea to toss in the cold call when that's normally very ill-advised, because the under the gun original raiser has the option of 4-betting this hand into oblivion, making it so the small blind never even sees a flop. There are very few circumstances where you'll want to call a raise and a 3-bet, meanwhile being out of position to both players, like what the small blind just did here. So anyways, when the action gets to me, I'm priced in to call, even though I'm only holding a very marginal hand. And of course, the cutoff calls as well. So we're taking this pot 5-handed. And this is exactly why I cautioned that a 3-bet to 25 is a terrible play. Even with pocket aces, you never want to take a pot 5-handed. It greatly increases the odds that you'll get cracked. And even with unmade hands, like ace-king, taking a pot massively multi-way like this greatly reduces your options of being able to steal the pot after you whiff a flop, which is going to happen 2 out of 3 times. Okay, so the flop comes Jack 6-3 rainbow. We don't flop anything whatsoever. But thankfully, after the action checks around to the button original raiser, he just checks it back, so we get to see a free card. The turn brings in a deuce of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board. 4-5 makes the nuts with a straight. This time, after the small blind checks, the under the gun original raiser leads with a 3rd pot size bet of 40 into the pot of 125. Obviously, with no pair and no draw of any kind, even for this cheap price, this should be a clear fold, right? Well, for the average player, I would definitely advise yes. However, I have over a decade and a half of experience behind me as a professional. Please allow me to dissect this hand for you through my eyes. Let's examine this hand from the perspective of every opponent's hand range. Even though this is only the third hand that we've been dealt, we've gained some very pertinent information about our opponents here. First off, from the very last hand, we gained the information that the under the gun original raiser bets extremely large when he has a big hand. He opened with a 10x raise, for crying out loud, when he was holding pocket kings. For perspective, the normal opening sizes in Vegas is between 3 to 5x, with an x representing a big blind increment. So a normal raise here for the 1-3 should be anywhere between 9 to 15 bucks. Our opponent did not do that. He allowed fear to dictate his actions. Even on a queen 6 deuce, completely rainbow flop with no rational draws of any kind, he proceeded with a 2/3 pot size bet. Right now, this same player is betting just under a third pot size bet into multiple opponents with a very noticeable flush draw on board. What information can we garner from that? He has a very mediocre hand at best. Alright, so now let's analyze the 3-better on the button. He checked back the action on the flop. This means that unless he is very specifically holding pocket jacks, judging from his pre-flop 3-bet sizing, he most likely has a hand like ace-king or ace-queen, and very occasionally, although much less likely, a hand like pocket 10s. Either way, he doesn't have very much on this sort of board either. Moving on to the other two opponents, the small blind checked twice, so he unlikely has anything. The only opponent we truly need to fear here is the cutoff, who may have slow played pocket 6s or pocket 3s on the flop. He's the player we need to worry about the most, who might have only just checked to the button hoping to see a c-bet that never happened. But aside from that, we pretty much have the green light here to start pulling shenanigans. I do not advise trying to mimic my play here, and I caution that I am only doing this because I have nearly 2 decades of experience. So instead of folding here with my ace high, I put in a raise to 120, which is still just barely a pot-sized bet. Everyone else quickly folds, just as I assumed they would, and the action swings around to the under the gun player. Okay, so now let's examine my bet sizing. I am not trying to get a fold here. This is actually an incredibly advanced bluff maneuver. By only risking 120, which is still only a pot-sized bet, I can snap fold to any aggression from the players behind me, like for instance if the cutoff or button really did slow play a set and then chose to raise. Secondly, I recognize that the under the gun player only has a one pair type of holding at best, most likely with a hand like king jack or something similar. I actually fully expect him to call here, but obviously I don't mind a fold either. The best bluffs are the ones that actually extract even more money from your unsuspecting victim. We have already garnered the information that our opponent plays with fear, and he is not very confident in this hand. Even if he does call here, I fully plan on blasting on the vast majority of river cards. I plan on shoving if the river puts out anything other than a jack, because if our opponent calls here, he'll be incredibly unlikely to fold trip jacks. Fortunately, it never comes to that. After tanking for about 45 seconds, our opponent puts in the fold. I decide to show my hand here, even though I normally advise my students never to show their hands if they're not forced to, because I'm doing it for a very specific reason. This is only the third hand I've been dealt. I'm setting a precedent right from the get-go that I'm an action player, and I want to unnerve my opponents into calling me light later down the road. What you guys need to understand is that I don't bluff just because I get the random itch, and I never 3-bet light just because I think a hand like king jack offsuit needs to be 3-bet or folded. My plays are usually very deep-rooted in sound logic, almost always utilizing what I suspect is fear or weakness to pounce. Whenever you bluff, you're telling a story, and whenever you try to scare a grown person into believing there's a monster under the bed, your story had better be pretty darn freaking believable. Jack 7 is just the fold. 5-8. Here the +1 opens to 10. The middle position and button both call. I look down at king 8 of hearts in the big blind, which is worth defending for 7 more. Had I been offsuit, or had I been facing a raise to like 15 for instance, I would just fold. So the flop comes 7-3-3 rainbow. We flop a whole lot of diddly squat. Since I'm first to act, I start with a check, and the action checks around. For contextual purposes, if I were last to act in this situation, on this sort of incredibly dry flop on a paired board, I would probably throw out a tiny third pot size bet to try to steal the pot, since it's unlikely that our opponents have anything at all. This is why position matters so much in poker, and why my hand is only worth calling for 7 more bucks pre-flop, and even then, only because there were several other players in the hand and I was already invested for $3. So anyways, the turn brings in a jack of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board. This doesn't improve our hand in the slightest. So when the action checks around to the middle position, who leads for 15, we're just gonna let this one go and move on. 6-8 offsuit is not worth defending from the small blind. Here we've lost a couple of players, so we're currently only 7-handed for this one. Under the gun opens to 15. I call on the button with pocket 7s, and the blinds get out of the way. So we go heads up, in position, to an absolutely gorgeous flop of 7-4-2 with 2 clubs and a diamond. We flop top freaking set on an all-low board with 2 clubs. Unfortunately, the original raiser only c-bets for 15. In the low stakes, recreational players almost always bet the strength of their hand. So when I see a c-bet for less than half pot into a board with 2 to a suit, I think our opponent is only just holding 2 random overcards. Still, I often preach on the channel that I almost never slow play. Like, almost ever. There are an exceptionally few instances where I would advocate for slow playing, but this isn't one of them. So instead of just calling, I put in a min raise to 30, which I expect even a player holding 2 random overcards to call. And if I was wrong, and our opponent is actually holding an overpair here, this sort of tiny bet sizing will provoke him to re-raise me. Surely enough, our opponent puts in the call. The turn brings in a 6 of spades, keeping the board 7 high. We maintain top set, but there are a couple of unlikely straights that could have completed. Our opponent checks. Okay, so if he has 2 random big cards, he's drawing completely dead and unlikely to continue for any amount. So we can go ahead and discredit those sorts of hands. If, however, our opponent is holding a hand like 8-9 suited, an overpair, or somehow just woke up with a club flush draw, we need to charge accordingly. So I throw out a 2/3 pot size bet of 60 into the pot of 94. You also have to keep in mind that I just made a massive airball bluff and then showed, so my opponents are more likely to float me with garbage, or even potentially try to make a play against me. You can't ever miss an opportunity to bloat the pot up when you have a strong hand. Unfortunately here, my opponent makes the fold, but it's always better to win a small pot than to lose a big one. King 4, Queen 9, King 4 again. Here the hijack opens for 10. The cutoff calls. Jesse 3-bets to 40 in the small blind with a stack of about 700 or so. I look down at King 10 of clubs in the big blind while holding a stack deep enough to completely decimate Jesse if the board comes out just right. If the positions were different and Jesse were on the button for instance, I would just fold here. But since I have positioned to the 3-bet aggressor, we're holding 2 suited Broadway cards, and I also highly suspect that the hijack late position opener isn't holding a hand strong enough to 4-bet, I make the cold call, and the other 2 players call as well. Why is it important that we're holding 2 suited Broadway cards compared to any other suited double gappers like 7-10 suited for instance? Well, for starters, if King 10 makes a straight using both cards, it'll always be the nuts. It's possible for 7-10 to make a straight on an 8-9 jack board and still be crushed by Queen 10. A King high flush will almost always be good as well. And lastly, with us holding 2 Broadway cards, it's possible for us to flop monstrous on a board that will also be good for the original raiser and the 3-better, because we will likely be sharing a lot of cards. For instance, if the flop comes King King 10 or Jack Queen Ace or something like that. With this sort of hand, we're not looking to flop just a naked king, and might not even be good on a 10 high flop either. So you do have to keep that in mind. We're deep enough though that we can invest 40 bucks to completely wreck someone's day, as long as we have realistic expectations of what sort of board is going to be good for us. Earlier I made the comment that the small blind shouldn't cold call a raise and a 3-bet to 25, yet here I am cold calling a raise and a 3-bet to 40. So what's the difference? Okay, for starters, the raise from the previous hand came from an under the gun open, which can sometimes include tricky hands like aces, hoping for someone else to 3-bet. Here we're facing an open from the hijack, which can very often just be a mediocre hand raising in position. We also have position in this hand to the 3-better, which is absolutely huge in these sorts of configurations. Position means so much more than just hand strength once you figure out how to utilize it. Okay, so we go 4 ways in an incredibly bloated pot to flop of queen, 7, jack, rainbow. We flop an open-ended straight draw to the nuts on a gorgeous rainbow board. Jesse starts with a check. I think in a multi-way pot like this, being out of position, he would bet here even with a hand as strong as top set. He would definitely bet with ace-queen. Ace-jack, even suited, seems a bit too light to be 3-betting out of position, so I think he very specifically has either ace-king or of course an underpair like pocket tens. Unfortunately, we are not heads up and there are still 2 players behind us, so the most prudent play here is to check. So that's what I do, and thankfully the action checks around. I'm hoping for an ace to roll out, because that'll definitely wreck some people's worlds. Unfortunately, the turn brings in a deuce of hearts, putting 2 hearts on board. Jesse checks again. With our open-ended draw, I want to start trying to take this pot down using fold equity. Our opponents behind have shown very little interest in the hand, but since we don't have position to them, it's going to be hard to try to get them to fold a queen or even a jack by the river unless we start applying some massive pressure now. I lead with a very strong 3/4 pot size bet of 120 into the pot of 160. Surely enough, the hijack and cutoff both fold, and Jesse pauses for a moment. He says I'm not giving him a good enough price with his ace-king, so he makes the fold as well. And just like that, we win another decent-sized pot with king high, utilizing fold equity to our advantage. So far, I've won every single significant hand that I've played, winning some pretty decent-sized pots too. But I've only made 1 real hand. Ironically, the 1 real hand that I actually made, I won less than the other 2 hands that I bluffed. So what's the takeaway? Poker is all about a keen awareness of the table dynamics, not about constantly making the nuts. Everyone eventually gets the same big hands over a large enough sample size. It's how you play all of the other hands when you don't have the nuts that truly matters.
Hey, what's up guys? Aero here. I'm here with Jesse, minivan poker guy. So Jesse had nowhere to go, like a stray homeless cat, and I felt so bad for this guy. He lives out of his minivan. So I was like, hey, why don't you come to Vegas, come hang out with me, and we'll try to get something going.
Yeah, we're gonna try to run it up tonight, so let's see what we can do.
We're gonna do a fun little contest, see who does better than like the next 4 hours. And what do you think we should put up at stake? How about like 10 push-ups? You've been at our older age. Can we do that?
I think I can handle 10.
So originally Jesse was gonna go to where?
Maryland Live, I got denied because they needed more, they need to go through the state to get permission to vlog, so that was a problem.
Even though he hates freaking Vegas, and he told me he hates Vegas, and right now Vegas is actually terrible, you guys. WPT here is here. So many would-be pros, a lot of Euro pros. Everyone's trying to make a name for themselves. The wait lists are like freaking hours long, and all the would-be fish are split amongst the dozens and dozens of tables. So it's hard to get a really good table. It's actually the worst place to play right now. But however, the win does have really easy recording rights. So I told him, hey, come here, we can do a vlog, and we'll have some fun. So.
Yeah, let's run it up. I'm going to make him do 10 push-ups.
All right, I'm an old man. He's going to make me do 10 push-ups. I'm actually a lot older than Jesse is. Let's do it, guys.
Let's do it.
Sorry, Doyle, but 10 deuce offsuit is a pretty freaking bad hand. King 4 yet again for the 3rd time. 10-7. Ace 5. Here, under the gun opens to 15. I call in the middle position with pocket 8s. The cutoff and button call as well, so we go 4-handed to a flop of deuce, jack, queen, with 2 hearts and a spade. This is not the sort of flop we were hoping for, so when the under the gun checks, I check as well, and thankfully the action checks around. The turn brings in a miraculous 8 of clubs, improving us to a set. 9-10 does make a straight, however. When under the gun checks for a 2nd time, I ain't afraid of no ghosts. You can't always be afraid of the nuts. You remember how I bluffed with complete air earlier and then showed my hand? Well, it's time to cash in on that image. I lead with an overbet of 75 into the pot of 64. You don't always have to use half pot or even 3/4 pot size bets. Surely enough, the cutoff makes the call, but the other 2 opponents fold. The river brings in an unsightly 5 of hearts, completing the front door flush draw. Had this card been another insignificant card, I was planning to use another massive bet sizing here, probably of at least 200 or even more. If I had position here, and my opponent checks, I would go for a value bet of like another 75 or so, targeting a slow played queen, or maybe even just a non-believing jack. But unfortunately, since I do not in fact have position, it would suck to bet here only to get jammed on by an obvious flush. I mean, I did make an overbet on the turn and then got called. That's very often done by a draw of some sort. So of course I make the rational decision and just check. My opponent checks as well and voluntarily tables ace jack. He called my overbet on the turn, drawing completely dead with just middle pair. I suspect he would have called another massive bet on the river as well if the runout had been different. So we scoop yet another decent sized pot. For this hand, we've lost several players, so we're currently only 5-handed for this one. Here the under the gun opens for 12. The button and small blind both call. Looking down at king jack offsuit in the big blind, this hand is just barely worth defending against a 4x open size, especially considering there are other players in the hand, and we're currently pretty short-handed as well. The flop comes 6, 7, jack, rainbow. We flop top pair with a great kicker. So after the small blind checks, I lead with a half pot size bet of 25 into the pot of 48. Whenever I flop top pair like this, I like to find out where I'm at by leading. If we face a substantial raise, depending upon the raise amount, we can just get away cheaply with the fold. Fortunately, it never comes to that, as everyone simply just folds, and we take down yet another pot. I'm currently up $400, and we're barely a half hour into the session. 3-5, 10-5 of spades. Even though it's suited, a hand like this is just way too disconnected to bother with. Here, under the gun limps, I put in a pot building raise of 13 with king jack offsuit in the cutoff. The big blind and under the gun limper both call. The flop comes 7, 6 deuce with 2 hearts and a spade. The action checks to me. On a 7 high flop with 2 hearts, there's no merit to see betting here. I will actually check back the vast majority of jack high flops and below if I don't actually hit anything. You don't need to see bet 100% of boards, especially ones that don't make any sense for your range. The only hands you can plausibly represent on small tiny boards like this is an overpair, and there are many other sorts of hands you can be holding in a single raised pot, like jack king offsuit for instance. So I just check the action back. The turn brings in a 10 of clubs. 8-9 makes the nuts. We don't improve whatsoever. Big blind leads with a tiny $10 bet. Under the gun puts in a raise to 35. I just make an easy laydown. However, I'm going to tell you what happens in this hand for informational purposes. After I fold, the big blind makes the call. The river is another 10 of diamonds, and the action checks around. Under the gun ends up showing 6-7 for a flop top 2 pairs that got counterfeited on the river. He was laying in the weeds trying to check raise me on the flop, which is exactly why I don't see bet on boards that don't make sense for my range. That proves one of my points. But then get this. The big blind ends up turning over 8-9 for the turn nut straight. He slow played the nuts even after getting raised on the turn on a really wet board. He definitely should have put in a re-raise in that situation. With how 1-3 players overestimate their hands, it's possible the under the gun player might have even gone all in. But instead, the big blind made the absolute bare minimum. And this is exactly why I'm always preaching for you guys to never slow play. There are just way too many action-killing cards that can come on the turn or river, like any heart, an 8, a 9, a deuce, or in this case, another 10. And if another 6 or 7 had come on the river, the big blind would have most likely given his opponent a full double up, even after giving him a free card. Seriously guys, stop slow playing. It's not cool, and it's not profitable.
Stop it. Get some help.
Okay, so here's a funny one. I open to 8 under the gun with 4-5 of spades, and only the blinds defend. We go 3 ways to flop of 7, king, jack, rainbow. I don't exactly remember the suits, but the action gets checked around. The pot was really small, and even though I had position, on a board that would normally hit a good portion of my range, I don't really try to steal super small pots, so I didn't bother putting in a c-bet. So long story short, the turn was a queen, and the river was a 9. putting a 1 card straight on board. Any 10 makes a straight and ace 10 makes the nuts. The action just checked around the whole way. What's funny about this hand is both of my opponents just folded on the river without bothering to show their hand, and I won with 5 freaking high. I mean, I was literally playing the board. I guess when you're running hot, you don't even need to bother to bluff to win. Your opponents might be so intimidated, they could just fold before the action even gets to you. Alrighty then, I'll take it. But in all seriousness, guys, there's no shame in just turning your hand over. You might never know when your 8 high might actually be good enough to win the pot. Here, under the gun opens to 12. We're still currently only 5-handed. The cutoff and button calls, but the small blind folds. I look down at King 4 for the 4th time today, but at least they're suited this time. Since I already have $3 invested, and since we're still short-handed, I defend for $9 more. We go 4 ways to flop a 5, King, Deuce, Rainbow with 1 club. We flop top pair with a garbage kicker, but we do have a couple of different backdoor draws. Since we're out of position, I start with a check. The action checks around to the button, who throws out a weak bet of 20 into the pot of 49. We have top pair, and our opponent may not necessarily have a king here, so I make the call, and the other 2 players get out of the way. The turn brings in an 8 of diamonds, keeping the board rainbow, but not improving our hand whatsoever. We still maintain top pair though, so I check again. This time, when our opponent throws out another half pot size bet for 45, I think he really does have at least a king here, and I don't want to chase for possibly 3 outs at best, so I make a disciplined fold. On a rainbow board like this, there are no rational draws our opponent could be chasing that we're ahead of, so even though he's giving us a very reasonable price, it's just not worth it without position, and without knowing if we're even drawing live. Ace 3 of diamonds in the small blind, but I end up chopping. Deuce 6, Jack 6, Jack Queen in the low jack. We're back up to 7-handed now, so I don't even bother limping with this sort of hand in this position. If we were still 5-handed, or if my position were slightly better, I would probably come in with a small open for about 10 bucks. 8-4 of clubs. Even though they're suited, this is a triple gapper, which means there's only one combination of a straight we could possibly make, utilizing both cards, and even then it won't be the nuts. So hands like this are just a fold. King 7, Queen 6. For this hand, we're back up to 8-handed again. Here, the hijack opens for 15. The cutoff and button both call. I'm holding 10-8 of hearts in the small blind, which is a suited 1-gapper. If this were heads up, I would just fold. But since we're going to be taking this at least 4 ways, I put in a tentative call, and the big blind folds. Now, you may be wondering why it matters if I were heads up with this hand or multi-way. It's pretty simple really. You don't really want to play suited connectors out of position, because in the unlikely event you actually make something monstrous, there's no guarantee your opponent will have anything strong enough to pay you off. And in every other instance, they can just bet you off your hand with position. Multi-way, however, it's kind of like buying a lottery ticket for 15 bucks. Regardless of how many people are in the hand, your ticket will still only cost 15 bucks. But if you happen to smash something monstrous, you stand to win a much bigger pot. Plus, being in a multi-way pot allows you to realize your equity a lot more often if you only just make something weak like middle or bottom pair, because your opponents will be much less likely to try to steal the pot multi-way. It's a lot easier to get a bluff past 1 opponent as compared to 3. So anyways, the flop comes Jack, Ace, Deuce with 2 hearts and a diamond. We flop a 10 high flush draw with some backdoor potential as well. Unfortunately, we can't just lead on a board like this because it heavily favors the original raiser's range, so I'm forced to just start with a check. This is the wrong type of board to utilize fold equity on. The hijack throws out a half pot size c-bet for 30. The cutoff calls. The button folds, but of course we're not going anywhere with our flush draw, so we call as well. The turn brings in a pretty spicy card in the form of an ace of hearts, pairing the top card. We hit our flush, but we lose to ace jack and pocket jacks. The hijack original raiser is pretty deep with over 600 behind, so I want to play this hand cautiously. I need to find out where we're at. I lead with a timid bet of 60 into the pot of 153. If the hijack raises here, depending upon the read I get, I may just fold. He's the guy who slow played that 8-9 earlier after turning the nut straight. Thankfully, he just folds. So it's the cutoff who makes the call, with a short stack of only 140 bucks, leaving himself only 80 bucks behind. The river brings in an inconsequential 8 of spades. I shove for my opponent's remaining stack, and he just folds, so no idea what he had, but it probably wasn't even an ace. The very next hand, the low jack opens for 15. I'm sitting here with king 8 of spades on the button. Even though I have the button, my hand is just a tad bit too disconnected to call versus a 5x open, so I just fold. I'd probably be willing to call up to a 3x open. You have to draw the line in the sand somewhere, and for me, with a suited but disconnected king, 3x is about the limit even with the button. The very next hand after that, the hijack limps. I put in a small pot building raise to 10 in the cutoff with jack queen offsuit. Remember how I folded this exact same hand earlier without even bothering to limp? But here I'm raising with it instead. It's all about position. Everyone ends up folding, but the hijack limper makes the call with his short stack of 80 bucks from earlier. The flop comes deuce, ace 7 with 2 diamonds and a heart. Our opponent checks. Even though I have position and it's an ace high flop, which is great for our range, I don't try to steal 100% of hands, especially when the pot is small, so I just check the action back. The turn brings in a queen of clubs, improving our hand to second pair. Once again, the hijack checks. This time, I decide to go for some thin value with a small bet of 10 into the pot of 24. Our opponent folds, so we win another tiny pot. 9-10, queen 9, queen 3, 10-5, jack 6. Okay, you guys ready for a fun one? Here we're down to only 6-handed. Under the gun limps. I look down at pocket 10s on the button. I think this is the first premium starting hand we've had all night. My formula for raising these sorts of hands is between 5 to 6x, plus an additional x for each limper. So I raise the action up to 20 bucks. The big blind and under the gun both call, so we go 3 ways to an absolutely fabulous flop of 4, 10, 9 with 2 spades and a heart. For the second time tonight, we flop top set, but it's on an extremely wet board. Us holding top set here makes it extremely unlikely that our opponents are holding anything other than a draw of some sort, which is exactly the kind of hand that can crack us. I do have position though, so when the action checks to me, I start with a half pot size bet of 30. If I were first to act, or if I'd only flopped middle set, I would probably lead much bigger here for like 45 to 50. Interestingly enough, both opponents make the call. So now I'm sitting here chanting silently in my head for a clean turn. So the turn comes, and it's alright I guess. It's the 10 of diamonds, giving us top freaking quads. We run into Quadzilla after betting the flop on a super wet board and getting both of our opponents to call. So here when the action checks to me, what do I do with quads? I have an unbeatable hand. I should just check here, right? ... Remember how I continue to advise you guys against slow playing? Well, I'm no hypocrite. I said there were very, very few situations where I'd be okay with slow playing. And believe it or not, even making quads here is not one of those situations. I decide to throw out some bait by making a ridiculously small bet, inviting for one of my opponents to make a play against me. I bet 35 into the pot of 151. Now you may be wondering, would I ever use this bet sizing with any normal hand? And the answer is simply no. I would never bet this small unless I have a hand that's pretty close to unbeatable, like top boat or something similar. My opponents don't know that though, and people in the low stakes will generally miss it as well. Everyone loves a cheap draw, not realizing that I only give cheap draws when my opponents are drawing very close to dead. And surely enough, after the big blind folds, the under the gun player takes the bait and puts in a much desired check raise to 135. Bro literally put in a check raise after I turned top quads. There are only one of 2 possible hands he could have here. Either he has a full house with a hand like pocket 9s or pocket 4s, or he's trying to make a move since he sensed the false weakness I portrayed on the turn. Listen to the original audio as I provoke my opponent to continue firing. Oh, you have a 10. You have a 10, huh? I think you're bluffing. Do you bluff?
Sometimes, yeah. Right now, I don't have a 10.
If our opponent had a full house here, no card can really come on the river that's going to make us lose out on action. I mean, I suppose he could have pocket 4s, and we might lose action with a 9 on the river, but that's about it. It's not like a 5th 10 can roll out. And if he's only just making a move, then we need to give him rope to continue firing. So after my verbal portrayal of weakness, I make the call. I mean, I guess I kinda don't have a 10 here. It's sort of true. I have 2 10s. So anyways, the river comes, and it's an insignificant 6 of diamonds. 7-8 does river a straight, but that doesn't really matter when we're friends with Quadzilla. And just as we predicted, our opponent fires out another delicious bet for 200. Obviously, if our opponent was just bluffing, we're not going to be able to squeeze out another dollar from him. But if by chance he really does have a full house here, or even a river straight, I want to go for all the beans. So I shove all in for the remainder of my opponent's stack, which is a pretty considerable amount for like another 500 bucks or so. We have our opponent covered, but we're trying to get the rest of his chips. Unfortunately, after only thinking things through for about 15 seconds, our opponent does indeed put in the fold. But look, we made an extra 335 this hand by not slow playing, even though we had an unbeatable hand. You should always be thinking, how do I get more money into this pot? And the vast majority of the time, that's not going to happen if you slow play your hands. Our opponent will later reveal he had pocket 8s this hand and really was just trying to make a move. The very next hand, I open to 8 with pocket deuces in the cutoff. The button and small blind fold, but the big blind defends for 5 more. The flop comes ace, 9, ace, rainbow. Surprise, surprise, we do not in fact flop a set. But when big blind checks, we want to try to deny some equity because most assuredly, any 2 cards he's holding is 2 overs to our pair. Plus the worst case scenario is if another 9 comes on the turn and we're reduced to deuce high. So I throw out a c-bet for another 10 bucks. Our opponent makes the call. So unless the turn or the river brings in another deuce, I'm just going to shut down. The turn brings in a queen of spades, and the action checks around. And when the river brings in a king of spades, we just go check, check again. Our opponent tables queen 9, so we lose this one. But at least we didn't try to fire another barrel on the turn, because it was definitely not getting through. King 4 for the 5th time, ace 8. Okay, so before the start of this hand, the table breaks, so we're moved to a fresh new table, taking Jesse along with us. When I look down at king 9 offsuit, I start to wonder, who let the dogs out? Well, it ain't me, cause I don't play this shite. 10-3, queen 10 under the gun, 5-6, 10-3 again, king 4 for the 6th time. By the way, don't try to read into signs and think you should play king 4 offsuit just because you keep getting dealt king 4. It's not a sign from the heavens. You're literally just getting dealt trash over and over again. Here the hijack limps. I raise to 15 in the cutoff with king queen offsuit. The small blind and hijack limper both call. So we go 3 ways to a flop of deuce 9-7 with 2 hearts and a club. The action checks to me, but with no equity whatsoever besides for 2 random overcards. I already told you guys that I don't try to steal pots on boards that don't make sense for our range, so I just check the action back. The turn brings in a 5 of diamonds. 6-8 makes a straight. This time, the small blind leads with a strong bet of 35 into the pot of 48. The hijack folds, and I just fold as well. Queen deuce, 9 deuce. Okay, so for context, before we get into this next hand, there's an action player on this new table who's blind raising a large portion of hands. Sometimes he just straight up shoves his whole entire stack into limped pots. And we're not talking a small stack either. He's been shoving between 300 to 500, and then just turning over 2 random cards like Jack 3 offsuit. So here, he's blind raised in the low jack to 25. I look down at pocket 8s under the gun and decide to limp, setting the trap. It folds around to the low jack, but since the action has not changed, his blind raise stands. The hijack calls, and the action folds around back to me. Okay, so you need to keep something in mind. Whenever there is a blind raise, if a pro like me ever limps in front of the blind raise, I have every intention to either call or raise 100% of the time. So when the action folds around to me, I raise things up to a staggering 150. My hand cannot withstand a large majority of flops, so I want to give my opponents an absurdly bad price, or to just have them shove right here and now. I'm not about to raise to like 75 or something silly like that. There's already over 50 bucks trapped in the middle, and I'm okay with just taking that down. So the low jack action player ends up making the fold, but the hijack surprises me by jamming all in with a stack of about 420. Alright, well, let's blaze it up. I don't think there's any way our opponent could have only just smooth called a $25 blind raise with a pair that's bigger than ours, so I make the snap call. We decide to table our hands before the cards come out, and it turns out I was right, but only just barely. Our opponent tables ace-king offsuit, so we only have about a 9 to 10% advantage here. Alright, come on, no whammy, no whammy, no whammy. The flop comes 4, 10, 4, rainbow. Oh phew, looking good. Our opponent is reduced to only about 26% or so with his 2 random overcards. But then the turn brings in a detestable ace of clubs. Mother trucker. Freaking A, man. Or freaking ace, I should say. See, I'm not that lucky, guys. It's not like I go around making sets all day long. ... I guess that river kinda does look like an 8 of hearts. In my defense, I was ahead the whole way, besides for a brief moment on the turn. I'm gonna just quietly scoop this pot now, like a true professional.
Oh yeah! Oh yeah, baby!
Deuce 4, 10-7 of spades in the small blind. Even though they're suited, this hand is not worth defending against a raise. Queen 6 of spades on the button. On this action-packed table, we need to tighten up our range because there could be a massive raise at any point in time, so this is just a fold. King 5. Here the low jack opens to 15. I call in the hijack with pocket 8s. The cutoff and button call as well. We go 4 ways to flop of king 7, 7, rainbow. Stop making fun of me, guys. I didn't hit a set here. But when the hijack leads with an incredibly weak c-bet of another 15, I recognize this as a potential airball bluff on an incredibly polarizing flop. I hate my position here with 2 opponents behind me yet to act, but I think I can afford a $15 investment and plan to fold if anyone raises behind, so I make the call. Unfortunately, after the cutoff folds, the button ends up calling as well, with a short stack of only about 130 bucks. Whoops, well that certainly isn't ideal. It's kind of hard to be ahead of 2 players here. The turn brings in a third 7, hearts this time. This time, the low jack gives up and just checks. Normally, this would be the point where I put out a small bet for like 25 or so, because I don't think the low jack has anything. But with the button behind me, my hands are tied here. A king or a 7 isn't folding here for any bet amount. I only just called the flop because I knew there was a good chance I was ahead of the low jack. So obviously I can only check. But the button ends up checking as well, which he would probably do regardless of whether he was holding a king or a 7. The river puts out the last remaining 4th 7. Mother father! I've been reduced to playing the board, and now any random ace actually makes the nuts. Once again the action checks through, but then after the button and I table our hands, the low jack original raiser slow rolls ace 4 offsuit for the runner nuts. The button called on the flop with pocket freaking 6s after a bet and a call, with a stack that's too small to capitalize even if a 6 did come up at some point in time. Oh well, people are allowed to do whatever they want with their own money. Him calling behind me screwed me up in this hand though. At least it was a pretty small pot. 6-3, ace-3, 8 deuce, queen 8 of diamonds under the gun. Here the +1 opens to 15 with a stack of about 125. The middle position 3 bets to 50 with a stack of about 1k, before the action folds around to me, where I look down at pocket 5s in the big blind. I have a stack large enough to set mine against the middle position, but unfortunately in this configuration, I can only fold. I would hate to cold call here, only to have the short stack shove all in, and then have the middle position raise on top. I would lose my 50 bucks and never even get to see a flop, so I just let my hand go. 8, 10. Okay, so here there's a live 6 from the crazy action player. He's the guy that's been raising blind and occasionally shoving all in for his entire stack, even into limp pots. The hijack comes in for the $6 when I look down on my least favorite premium starting hand on the button. Oh yes, we're talking about the accursed Pocket Kings. I haven't lost a big pot all day. I guess it's about that time. I don't want to put in a raise here though, in case we can get the straddle to spaz out and just ship it. So I make a sneaky play and only just smooth call, even with only the blinds and straddle yet to act. So the small blind folds, the big blind calls, and sadly, my plan falls face first when the straddle wisely checks behind. The flop comes queen, deuce, queen, with 2 diamonds and a heart. Oh perfect, it's a paired board in a limp pot. This is exactly what I want to see with Pocket Kings. Not! The big blind just open rips it with a short stack of about $24, and after the other 2 players fold, obviously I can't go anywhere here with my kings, so I make the call. The turn brings in an ace of clubs, and the river completes with another ace of hearts. Big blind tables queen 7 of spades for flop trips that rivered a full house, and dejectedly, I toss my Pocket Kings back into the muck where they belong. You know, it really wouldn't have even mattered how I played this hand, because the big blind wasn't going anywhere with queen 7 suited and a super short stack. He's the guy who called with the pocket 6s in that last hand with the king 7-7 flop after a bet and a call. I just think it's really funny that of all the hands I could have in this spot, of course it had to be Pocket Kings. You guys think it's a joke, but I honest to goodness have a really bad history with Pocket Kings. Here under the gun limps, I raised to 15 in the cutoff with Pocket 8s, a hand that's been historically way better for me than Pocket Kings. The small blind and under the gun limper make the call. The flop comes 3, deuce, jack, with 2 clubs and a diamond. We can't beat the jack, but there's a decent chance we might still be good here. So when both opponents check to me, with only 1 overcard out there, and a hand that's very unlikely to improve, I start with a very small c-bet of a stale 15 into the pot of 48. I'm choosing a sizing that targets their small pairs and their draws. Undaunted, both opponents make the call. The turn brings in a 9 of hearts, demoting our hand to 3rd pair. This time, when both opponents check the action over, there's no reason to bet here. We're hoping to get to a cheap showdown, so I just check the action back. The river brings out a beautiful card, but it's not an 8. It's another jack, hearts this time, decreasing the odds that either of our opponents is holding a jack, especially with how the hand has gone so far. So when both opponents check for a 3rd time, I want to go for some extremely thin value. Keep in mind I'm literally holding 3rd pair. I can beat a 3 or a 2, however, as well as any pocket pair between that and ours. We're targeting some extremely weak hands here, so I shoot out an irresistible bet of $10 into the pot of 93. Now you may be wondering, why bother? Why am I bothering to get $10 worth of value in a pot of nearly $100 when I'm already up over $1,400 at this point? The answer is simple really. People struggle to get a job that pays $20 an hour. I'm not about to pass up making an extra $10 when it's really only going to take me a few seconds of effort. Yes, I am that petty. And yes, I want every tiny edge I can squeeze out. There's a reason I have such a high hourly rate, and I need to be thankful for every dollar that I can make while I can still make it. I mean, I may not look it, but I'm getting pretty up in the years. I sometimes ask my wife if she's seen my wallet or my phone, while it's literally in my pockets. So anyways, the small blind ends up making the call. The under the gun folds, I show, and I'm good. Here I open to 13 in the cutoff with ace-jack offsuit. Only the big blind ends up calling. The flop comes deuce, 6, 5 with 2 spades and a diamond. We don't flop anything whatsoever. So when the big blind checks, like I've said before, I don't bother stealing small pots, especially when the board doesn't make sense for our range, so I just check the action back. The turn brings in a 3 of hearts, putting a 1 card straight on board. The action checks around for a second time. The river brings in a king of clubs. We break out completely, so when the big blind leads for 15, I just fold and let this one go. King 8, Queen 3, Ace 8, King 8 again, 6 deuce of hearts, 7 deuce, 10 deuce of diamonds. I mean, they are suited and I am on the button, but nah. 6 deuce of diamonds this time, ace deuce, ace 5. In this hand, the cutoff blind raises to 100, with a stack of about 1,000. This hand is just a bit too loose to limp in with, knowing there's going to be a raise to 100, so I just let it go. For informational purposes, if it were our opponent's last 100, or if he had blind shoved all in, I would not mind limping here, and as long as no one else limps, I wouldn't mind calling off that blind raise. We're ahead of the majority of random 2 cards. In fact, I once called a $3,000 blind shove while holding ace 7 offsuit, and ended up winning the biggest session I'd ever won in a 2-5 game at the Win. There's a big difference between calling a blind shove versus calling a $100 blind raise with my opponent still holding 900 left behind, however. Deuce 3, 9, 5. I hate working a 9 to 5, so definitely not gonna play this one. 6, 3. Not playing Baccarat, so definitely mucking this garbage. 8, 5. 4 deuce, 9 deuce. Sheesh, what the heck? I keep getting non-stop garbage hands containing a deuce. Jack 4 of diamonds. Here under the gun opens for 12. I have Jack 4 suited, aka the flat tire, aka the Robbie. But you know what I think a jack is for? It's for folding. 8, 3 of diamonds. Time to double down. Oh wait, we're not playing blackjack, and I promised my wife I would try to stop gambling. So even though this garbage is suited, it still needs to hit the muck. 6, 9.
Oh my.
How sublime. Too bad the wifey is asexual, so there won't be any 6, 9 in this household. Time to fold this shite. 10, 3. Alright, so after over 30 minutes of non-stop folding, I finally pick up another playable hand. Here the action player is back to his usual shenanigans and has blind raised to 90 in the hijack. I'm holding pocket 7s under the gun. As usual, since the blind raise is not binding unless the action stays the same, I decide to just limp. The action folds around to the hijack, who is forced to blind raise to 90, but out of nowhere, Jesse calls the $90 raise on the button. Oh no, 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 my friend, we're not doing that. Did you not see my $3 limp? I know that Jesse has a pretty strong hand here if he's willing to call a $90 raise, even if it is blind. But my range is infinitely stronger than his, considering I limped, knowing full well that a $90 raise is coming. Even against as strong as Ace-King, I'm mathematically ahead. I'm willing to play for all the beans against his stack def, given the dynamic of this hand, and the fact that there's already $180 trapped. So I put in the good old-fashioned Aero limp raise to 403. This will put the hijack almost completely all in for his entire stack, so he quickly gets out of the way. And Jesse reluctantly folds his hand as well, letting me know that he is folding King Jack of Hearts, so he snatched nearly $200 without seeing a flop. Jesse asks to rabbit hunt, and he does end up out-flopping me, so if he had shoved, he would have won, but that's being results oriented. I will be ahead of King Jack here 100% of the time with how I played my hand. In this particular case, Jesse had 2 live overcards, but he could have very easily been dominated to 3 outs or less, so he made the right fold at the time. Ace 4, 9, 5. Once again, thanks but no thanks. Here the cutoff opens for 15. I have Ace 10 of clubs on the button, which is a magnificent hand in magnificent position, so I make the call. Keep note of the fact I am not 3-betting with this hand. My opponent is using a 5x opening size. Had my opponent used a 3x opening size, I'd be much more inclined to 3-bet here. But versus a 5x opening size, I'm dominated against all bigger ace-x hands and behind all pocket pairs as well. There's just simply no merit to 3-betting here when your opponent is already screaming strength. This may play differently in higher stakes, or in live stream games, like for instance when I play on the Absolute Nuts live stream. But here in the low stakes in Las Vegas, a 5x raise usually denotes a pretty strong hand. Keep in mind that this only applies to Vegas and casinos that play like Vegas. Your local casino, especially if you play in the Southern California area or in Texas for instance, may play completely different. All of my hand analysis based on bet sizing only applies to casinos and card rooms that play a bit more structured versus the loosey-goosey spots where people have very little value for money. If you play in a location where the common mantra is no gamble, no future, you can bet your ducklings that the action is going to be a bit more wild. Okay, so the small blind and big blind end up calling as well. The flop comes queen, deuce, jack, with 2 diamonds and a spade. We flop a gut shot draw with an overcard that may or may not be good if it hits. The action checks around to the cutoff, who throws out a timid c-bet of 25 into the $60 pot. For this small sizing, we're both pretty deep, so I call with my gut shot, and the other 2 opponents fold. I have anywhere between 3 to 7 outs here, depending upon if the ace is any good. I have to discredit a king of diamonds, for instance, because there's no reason why my opponent can't have ace queen of diamonds here, which would explain the large pre-flop bet, but the much smaller continuation bet. Realistically, I'm only going to be stoked if we hit our gut shot and it's not a diamond. So anyways, the turn does not in fact bring in a king. It's a 6 of spades. And what's worse, our opponent now dials up the heat with a bet of 80 into the pot of 110. Alright, well, I tried. I can't continue against a bet of this sizing. I put in the fold, and our opponent was nice enough to turn over pocket queens. Pocket freaking queens for the flop top set. So I guess an ace wouldn't have been good after all. But I was definitely getting paid if I could have spiked a king. And that's why I'm even willing to call with gut shots on boards with 2 to a suit, as long as the price is right. Jack 6, King 3, 4-5 of hearts, normally a very playable hand, but here there's a live 6, so I fold in the low jack since the maniac is on the button and you never know when he's gonna spaz out. King 3 of clubs, even though they're suited, my position is early, so this is just a fold. Here I decide to limp with pocket 6s under the gun. No need to bloat up the pot when there's a maniac on the table. The middle position and low jack limp as well. When the maniac raises things up to 40 in the high jack with a stack of about 600, we don't need to really worry about his bet sizing because he's just doing his thing as a maniac. Jesse calls in the small blind. I call under the gun. And the middle position and low jack all call as well. So we go 5 ways to flop a 4, 8, 9 with 2 clubs and a spade. Once again, we miss another flop. Oh, woe is me. I'm just like so unlucky. I can't make a single hand tonight. Alright, fine, I'm just kidding. I realize I've been running pretty darn good, but here we only have third pair. So when the action checks around to the middle position, who throws out a timid bet of 65 into the pot of 203, with a stack of about 365, I contemplate my actions for a moment when things fold around to me. This opponent has proven on several occasions to be more of a calling station. Even though his bet is super weak with relevance to the pot, I don't think this guy would fold to a shove here, even with just middle pair. So I decide on the prudent path and just make the fold. 10-4, Jack 4, Jack 3, 5-6. Here under the gun opens to 15. Even though I'm holding King Jack, it's not good enough to play against someone else's 5x opening raise, so I just make the fold. Here the middle position limps. I raise to 10 in the low jack with Jack 9 of diamonds, using my typical sizing of 3x for a speculative hand. The hijack, cutoff, button, and middle position all call, so we go 5 ways to flop of 3, deuce 7 with 2 spades and a club. We flop absolute squadouche. So when the action checks around to the cutoff, who throws out a bet, I really don't even pay attention to the sizing. I'm out of there. 6 deuce, 8 9. Here the hijack opens to 20, which is a larger than normal open size. But you do have to keep in mind we're on an action heavy table after all. The cutoff min raises to 40. Well, actually, a min raise would be 437. Yes, I realize that, but it's close enough. I look down at pocket sixes in the big blind, but this is a pretty iffy spot. If I think the hijack has any possibility of 4-betting here, I need to just fold. But the way the table is playing right now, I think people are just opening bigger than normal, without necessarily having anything amazing. So I decide to put in a very tentative cold call, and thankfully the hijack only just calls as well. The flop comes 9, 8, 5 with 2 clubs and a diamond. We flop a gut shot straight draw with a pair. A 7 would be absolutely beautiful, a 6 would give us a set, and there's always the possibility we might just be good right now. I start with a check. Thankfully the action checks around. I think there's a very good chance we're actually good right this moment. The turn brings in a deuce of hearts, not changing anything. If we were good on the flop, we should still be good now on the turn. Even though I'm literally sitting here with third pair, I think we have the best hand. Obviously, I'm not completely confident, so I check for a second time. If one of our opponents decides to bet, we can gain a lot of information based on their bet sizing. And surely enough, the hijack throws out a feeler bet, betting only 40 into the pot of 123. Even against this tiny sizing, the cutoff folds. It would really suck to call here, only to lose to a random 8 like ace-8 suited or something similar. So instead, I decide to take a much more aggressive route. I put in the good old arrow check raise to 165, choosing a sizing that only a draw of some sort would call. Not even a 9 would normally call versus a check raise for this amount. So after about 15 seconds, our opponent does indeed put in a call. So the river comes, and it's an absolutely gorgeous 7 of spades, upgrading our hand to a straight. This is about as good as it gets. Okay, so if we put our opponent on a draw on the turn, it would be nonsensical for me to bet here, even though I just improved to a straight. Our opponent can't both be on a draw, but then suddenly wake up with a hand that's good enough to call us here that we have beat, right? The duality of that nature cannot be true. So if I think our opponent was on a draw, the only sensible play for me here is to check and hope that he takes the bait. So that's what I do. But unfortunately, our opponent just checks the action back. So we table our hand and we scoop this pretty magnificent pot. King 8. Here under the gun limps. The middle position maniac decides to raise to 30 without looking. It's kind of like his blind raises earlier, except he didn't announce it ahead of time. Looking down at pocket 8s on the button, I attempt to isolate with a 3-bet to 90. Unfortunately, this does not work out as planned when the under the gun limper cold calls the $90 raise, and the middle position action player tags along as well. The flop comes Queen, 7, Ace, Rainbow, which is a pretty disastrous flop for our hand. Under the gun leads for 100 into the pot of 274. The middle position folds. Even though this is a pretty small sizing, this board is pretty polarizing, and it's not the sort of flop we were hoping for, so I have no choice here but to fold. 6 deuce, Queen 3. At this point, Jesse concedes, which I think is perfect timing, because I have over 100 hands worth of content, and if we had continued for another hour, this video would be incredibly long.
Alright, so we just finished up our session. I recorded a little bit over 100 hands. We decided to cut it short because the lead was not even funny. We're at 3 hours.
You killed me, bro. You killed me.
Jesse,
it was not even close.
Minivan poker, it was a blast. You're up like 200 and some change.
Yeah, I won like 200 bucks. Hey, a win's a win.
Definitely. $200 in 3 hours. What is that? Almost, about $75 an hour if you're 200 and some change. I cashed out 2,100 and some change.
That's it, bro.
2,100 and some change. So we're about to see Jesse do some push-ups, and we're gonna call it a night, guys.
2,100. You're a monster, bro. You're a monster.
All right, we'll see you guys later.
In for 500 and out for 2141 for an absolutely delectable profit of $1,641 after 3 hours and 8 minutes of playtime for an insane hourly rate of over $500 an hour while playing a 1-3 game. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys aren't familiar with this channel, please make sure you check out Minivan Poker. He has a super awesome narration style poker vlog with insanely good editing and good storytelling. If you like what you saw today, please smash that like button. Hype this video if you can. Subscribe to the channel for more tips and tricks on how to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em. Follow me on Instagram to get details on my $500 monthly cash drawings. Check out my Patreon to see more of the coaching series and to get early access to my vlogs. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.